Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Peace Vigil webinar. I'm Samir Dasani with Peace Vigil. We're at peacevigil.net. Thanks for joining, first of all. I just want to remind everyone that this is a place of conversation. Unfortunately, because we have many participants today, we may not be able to hear from everyone. But as always, if you have questions, comments, please go ahead and use the chat function. Also, I won't go over all of our usual ground rules, but essentially we treat everyone with respect. This is a place of peace, a place of learning. We can disagree with each other, but we must do so respectfully. That said, I'd just like to say a few words before we introduce our main presenter for today. So the topic, as you'll see, is Gandhi in South Africa. What did Gandhi learn in South Africa? And let me just start with some personal reflections. Gandhi is, in some ways, not just for India, but almost for the entire world. Gandhi is an icon of peace, an icon of some kind of nonviolent transformation from an old era to a new era. I don't like icons. I'm an iconoclast, right? I'm a Marxist who doesn't like to quote Marx. I'm an Ambedkarite who's very suspicious of people who are always using Ambedkar to justify their own perception. So I can really sympathize with people who have been critical of Gandhi, and I myself have been critical of Gandhi. And to some extent that continued, especially when we moved here to South Africa, because in South Africa, some of Gandhi's earliest statements in South Africa had an elements of anti-Black racism, for sure. And I think he himself would perhaps admit that later in his life. But as I grow older, I'm understanding that being a real iconoclast means understanding that it's really about structures, right? So we all are humans. We've all been socialized in a certain way, and we act the script out based on our socializations and based on our environments. So what are the institutions that push us into one pattern or another pattern of behavior? Using that kind of structuralist model, it's not hard for me to explain the behavior of someone like Donald Trump or Kim Kardashian or almost any of us, frankly. We're all mostly just actors playing out scripts that have been written by our own life conditions and the main institutions that govern us in the 21st century. Now, Gandhi, for all of his faults, and he has many as we'll discuss, he was not playing out anyone else's script. He was pushing the limits of his own experience, his own comfort. He made mistakes, as I say, but he was always engaging with the question of what one small man can do with just a few tools. What were those tools? His first tool was a sense of civic responsibility to his community and his nation. And for a long time, the community was the Indian community as a whole, and the nation was the British Empire that he was identifying with for the entire period he was here in South Africa. His second tool were petitions or letters or other forms of getting attention from authorities. So as a loyal subject of the empire, he has the right to beseech the empire's officers to do the right thing, right? That's how he would frame it. That's how he would definitely see it. His third tool, when that second tool didn't work, was non-cooperation and civil disobedience. These are tools that he, in some ways, pioneered, maybe even discovered here in South Africa, as we'll be learning. And I think most importantly, his fourth tool was his almost unlimited courage. The amount of courage he had to do the things that he did is quite remarkable. So for us now, engaging with the story of Gandhi is one way in which we can understand that history, which plays a role in so many of our own histories. We can also understand ourselves. Are we acting out a script that an incisive playwright may have written for us when we were children? Or are we willing to break the script to do what we think is right? I would like you to keep these questions in mind as Shirin takes us through the history. That said, I'll now introduce our main presenter, Shirin. Shirin has been both a practitioner and a theorist of peace education all her life. Being the child of a high caste Hindu and a Muslim in some ways meant she had no choice. Her lessons about the cost of hate came very early as parts of both of her extended families disowned her and her parents. She also grew up in the context of doing popular education against hate, as her parents were founders of one of India's oldest street theater movements. She studied in a Christian-run school for 14 years, which remained true to the pluralist ethos it was the Nehruvian ideal of India. Shirin did her BA honors thesis on the use of stage to create social change, and her master's thesis on how theocracies can entrench hatred and injustice. For that work, she focused on the Hudud ordinances in Pakistan, but the discussion was relevant in India at that time, and it's even more relevant in India today. Shirin is co-founder of Peace Vigil and is known for taking an unorthodox approach to the pedagogy of peace education, using storytelling, theater, song, and quizzes. In the course of our work at Peace Vigil, Shirin has come across references to the legacy of Gandhi in South Africa and realized not only that she didn't know enough about that legacy, but that most peace educators around the world didn't know that story as well. To prepare for this webinar, she's dug up a lot of resources. Please join me in welcoming Shirin.
Thank you, Samir. It's always our attempt at Peace Vigil to share the knowledge that we find in the world to be more effective in our pursuit for a more peaceful society. And I hope that this information on Gandhi in South Africa will make us better equipped to protect and promote peace around the world. We will start with our own reflections on what we know about Gandhi. We won't fill this out. It is just for our own reflections. If each of us can spend a couple of minutes just thinking about what we know of Gandhi, and perhaps we can come back to it at some point to compare notes and also to see what new things we have learned in this presentation. It is important to know who Gandhi was when he started for South Africa, so that when it is time for us to see who Gandhi is at the end of his stay in South Africa, we can see the growth, we can see changes in him. So when Gandhi started for South Africa, we should remember that he was a very young man in his early 20s. He was from a family with not too much money from Gujarat. When I say not too much money, it's important to know that he wasn't poor. So they didn't have a lot of money, but they were certainly not poor. They had enough gold to sell so that he can go and study abroad. His brother also had studied abroad. And he was from a family that wasn't so poor that they had any issues with food or regular needed for life. Also, he was from a city, Porbandar, which is a coastal town. But when he was very young, they moved to Rajkot, which is more inland than Porbandar is. He wasn't from a big city like Bombay or Calcutta. So he was from Gujarat. His language skills also were mostly Gujarati. He did learn English, but he spoke Gujarati. And at home, the religious beliefs, I would call them eclectic. And there are a couple of things we must remember is that in those days, it wasn't like today when we just categorize people as Hindus or Muslims or Christians. In those days, especially what we call Hinduism, was considered a way of life in which people had their various sects. So, you could be worshipping Vishnu and you would be called a Vaishnavite. Or there will be, Shivites, the people who worship Shiv. Within those also, there would be various sects. So you couldn't say this is a Hindu family. People didn't say that. People said, oh, this one's mom follows this particular sect, the dad follows this. It was quite common to have a mix of things. And here I would like to mention that Gandhi's mother's religious beliefs did have a significant impression on him. His mother, Putli Bai, came from the Krishna Bhakti. It's important, it's a Bhakti-based tradition. It's called the Pranami tradition. And their religious texts included the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavad Purana, but also there were other teachings from other traditions, from other religions. There was a collection of 14 texts which had teachings from the Vedas, but also the Quran and the Bible. So it's important that he was exposed to it, and his mother was a big influence on him. In fact, the hymn that we associate very closely with Gandhi, Vaishnava Jan, it is a 15th century hymn from the Pranami tradition. It is written in Old Gujarati. And what Vaishnava Jan says is that if we are sympathetic to other people's pain, that is the real sign of a believer, and that we shouldn't be too arrogant or proud when we help other people who are in pain. The third thing that I'd like to mention, which I never knew, in fact, all the people I have talked to don't know this, that Gandhi was excommunicated from his caste. And the reason why this happened was that he left Gujarat to get a ship from Bombay to sail to England to study. And when he was leaving Bombay, he wanted to leave Bombay. The people he was staying with were the people of his caste. You know, this is how it worked in the old days. You went from one place to another, and you stayed with the people of your religious caste. And he belonged to the Mod Baniya community. The community basically is a community of merchants, of bankers, of money lenders, and Mod is an area which falls in Gujarat and Rajasthan. And so he was a Mod Baniya, born as a Mod Baniya, according to his caste. And when he went to Mumbai, the head of that community in Mumbai said to him that you cannot cross the waters. And I'm sure you've heard this, that in many communities in India, it was considered wrong and bad to cross the waters beyond India and go abroad. So he was told that you cannot go. And he insisted that he will go because that was his whole plan. He was going to go to England to study law. And when he was told that he cannot go, he insisted that he will go. So the Mod Baniya community excommunicated him. He was no longer considered part of that caste. He was told that you are no longer part of us. So this was a big thing for people in those days. But you know, this is what happened to him, and he did go away to England to study abroad. When he got there, he studied hard. He also, his English improved. He was speaking in English more, so he knew it as a language, but he now was speaking it. You know, he learned a lot about the culture there. So he had that experience living in England, and he became a barrister. So already now he's part of a very small, privileged group of people, of Indians. Not everyone in India was a barrister. It was a very small group. So we have to consider all these things when we try to see who Gandhi was. He was a very shy person. And so as a result, what happened was that when he started to practice in Bombay and also in Rajkot, he practiced, he was not very successful. He was not only shy, he would have like stage frights. And if you are a lawyer speaking in a court, it is like a stage, you know, it is like theater, and he just couldn't do it, and he wasn't successful. Then what happened was that there was a guy from Kathiawar called Dada Abdullah who had a big shipping business in South Africa. He had quite a big business, and he got into some legal problems, and he needed somebody who could read Gujarati and translate those things that were needed for the court, the correspondence he had with this person who scammed him. So he needed somebody who could translate from Gujarati to English and also knew the British law. So that's how Gandhi got work. And South Africa in those days, large parts of what we call South Africa today were British. So, you know, the British law was needed there. And he got a salary of £105 plus travel expenses, which brings us to the point of his being a passenger Indian. And we will understand why he was a passenger Indian. By the way, £105 in those days was quite a big amount of money. You'll see there's a picture of Dada Abdullah with Gandhi. Now, let us understand what it means when we say somebody was a passenger Indian. So there were two categories of Indians in South Africa: indentured and passenger. These are indentured laborers. This is a ship. You will see there is a white man on the right. Maybe there's another white man on the left. I can't see clearly, but there's one white person there on the right. He's probably in charge of this whole group of people. Now, the reason why I call this the people after slavery, this slide with the picture of these obviously poor people from India. The reason I call them people after slavery is because, as we know, slavery ended in 1833. And when slavery ended in the British Empire, 800,000 people were freed, people who had been enslaved. But you see, it all sounds very good. Oh, okay, finally slavery ended, all these people were freed. But it's not as simple as that, because any colonial power, it is taking resources from the colonies and basically exploiting the colonies. They need labor. So now they don't have this 800,000 people who were slaves. So how do they get the labor to clear the lands, to work on the plantations, to work in railways, to work as servants? They need people. So they came up with a new system, and it is called the indenture system. It is basically a form of bondage. It's a debt bondage. So if I give you £10 in advance, or I will say that you will be paid a certain amount every month, and say some rations, food rations, you have to then sign a contract with me that says that you will work for me for 5 years. You cannot leave. It is a fixed contract. I give you money, you stay with me for 5 years, you cannot leave. So you're not free. You cannot say, okay, I don't like this work, I'm sorry, I think I signed up for the wrong thing and I'm not gonna do it, I'm gonna leave. In addition, I can force you to work for someone else. So if I decide to fold up the business today, or I don't need you anymore, I can pretty much sell you to another person. I can say, okay, this is now kind of my property, and I'm going to hand this person on to someone else. And you had no say in it. And we are talking of very small amounts of money. We are not talking of huge salaries, and then you can say, okay, you're bound by it because we are paying you so much. No, we are talking of like 12 cents a month. Plus food, and food is really what it looks like people agreed to do this work for. So I'll show you, for instance, the state of many Indians in the British colonies like India. These are people from India. These are actual photographs of people from those days. This is poverty in India due to colonialism. They were so poor that if somebody offered food every month, people did agree to work. This is one thing. The other thing is that many people were actually tricked into it. A lot of the women were told that you were going to work for a British family taking care of their kids, or you'll be a cook. And so you agreed. And then you found out later on that you were actually going to be working on a sugar plantation for 5 years or more. The other thing is that this system required you to go to a magistrate's office and put your thumbprint on an affidavit that said that you're doing this voluntarily. So, the British obviously wanted to tell everybody that, look, this is not force, this is voluntarily done. So a lot of these people were told stories which were false, and so that they would go to the magistrate, sign this with their thumb, and agree to things that actually were not told to them earlier. They couldn't read. A lot of people couldn't read. These people are being paid cents, like a few cents or a few shillings a week or a month. There is an estimate that people were being paid about 20 shillings a month for this work around this time, when Gandhi was being paid 105 pounds a year. So it's a big difference. And let us look at an old map of the indentured laborers' route that they followed. And through this route, 3.5 million Indians were transported to various colonies to provide labor for mainly plantations, but other things as well. Again, we must remember that slavery ended in 1833, so this system started at around this time and it continued till about 1920. So we are talking about a long period of time. A lot of people were transported in this time. So that's why there's a huge Indian diaspora from the Pacific Ocean to the Indo-Caribbean and the Indo-African populations. You know, there's all this whole area that you see, the line that is there. And South Africa was one of these places. It's very important that, you know, if you're part of the Indian diaspora, to understand, if you're not part of the Indian diaspora in these countries, to understand how Indian diaspora is very different in these countries to that in the US, Canada, or Great Britain. These people are people after slavery. Their freedom was taken away from them. Their dignity was taken away from them. The contract was for 5 years when they were transported from India, but many of them, most of them did not return. Just to give you an example, that by 1838, 25,000, so 1838 means only 5 years since slavery ended. So in those 5 years, 25,000 Indian laborers had been shipped to Mauritius. The majority of the population of Mauritius today are descendants of the Indian indentured laborers. Look at the conditions that, you know, they are traveling in. And I must tell you something about Gandhi. So look at these pictures. These are real people with real names and real families. You know, they were really not much better situated than slaves. So in this scenario, Gandhi is coming. Yes, he's Indian, but he's in a different category of Indians. And he was very class conscious. So when he came to South Africa, he was supposed to travel first class. But when he reached the ship, it was found that they had overbooked, just like they do these days as well, on aeroplanes. But he didn't get his space, and because he was Indian, you know, it was decided that it's okay if, you know, he can be bumped to the lower class. And he insisted that he's not going to do that, and he really would not travel anything less than first or second class. So he struck up a friendship with the captain of the ship, and actually ended up staying with the captain during the entire journey. He just did not think that it was right that he should travel with the common people. These are the so-called common people. All of them came to different parts of the British colonies. Many of them were people who lost their names, because when they came to the shores of, say, South Africa, and they were asked what their names were, the British orderly there couldn't write their name properly. You know, you end up with a new name suddenly. So, you know, in South Africa, for instance, a lot of the names are different from India. The spellings are different, but also you can see the lineage. So we have Naidus, Chettis, Reddys, Naikars, Maestries, Maharajs, so it does give you that idea that yes, they came from India. Yes, spellings are different. Some of the names are totally new also, but there is a continuity as well. And yes, they came mostly for plantations, but they were also working as domestic workers. They were working in railways and so on. Here, there's another picture. And this is a present day picture of the journey from Mumbai to Durban, which is what Gandhi did. It takes over a day today, just over a day. But in those days, it used to take 4 to 5 months, it took a long time. And many of the indentured laborers, they used to die because of the conditions on ship. So for instance, in 1856-57, there is a record that the average death rate of Indians traveling to the Caribbean was 17%, due to diseases like dysentery, cholera, and measles. After they disembarked, there were further deaths because they were kept in holding cells, just like we do with refugees today. These were not refugees, of course, but the conditions can be, there can be similarities. You can see the similarities. There also many people died because of different climate conditions and so on. So we have now understood the distinction between an indentured laborer in Gandhi, and Gandhi, when he arrived, Indians of indentured laborer category had already been there since 1833, around that time. So these people were often called as coolies. Now, who is a coolie? Can somebody explain who a coolie is? I'm sure everyone has heard the term coolie. That is, yeah. So somebody is writing, it is a person who lifts other people's baggages, a porter. Yes, yes, that is the general understanding of the word coolie in India, a porter. In the British colonies, anybody who was a laborer from South Asia, Southeast Asia, China was a coolie, and it was a derogatory term. Just like these days we say somebody is an unskilled laborer. It's a very strange thing to say about somebody. They are unskilled laborers when they're doing a lot of things that none of us could do. I mean, to actually lift a heavy sack or a suitcase and carry it for a kilometer is not something that I could do. These people did it, and we call them today unskilled laborers. So these were people who did a lot of different variety of work, but it was all hard work, hard labor, and they were called coolies. And the British used that term, and Gandhi was highly offended when he was referred to as a coolie, because he obviously did not think of himself as part of the laborer class. He thought he was above. Again, we must remember he was extremely class conscious. He made sure that he did not travel a lower class than what he thought he was entitled to, which was the first or the second. As I told you, he struck up a friendship with the captain of the ship and traveled with him. He did not identify himself as part of the working class. So he arrives at age 23, a very young man. That's why I'm saying, there's a lot of room to learn. He's only 23. When we are talking about all these things, he's only 23 in 1893. And again, to remind you, 1833 slavery ended. So there's been a lot of time, 60 years. So it's been a long time. So there are all these Indians in South Africa. And he arrives in Durban, which is in the British colony of Natal. If you see in the map, there is Durban. If you look on the right side of the country, Lesotho. And then above that is Pietermaritzburg, where the incident of the train happened. I'm sure you all know about it. And the coolies have been present there since 1833. I'm stressing on this again and again so that we remember this as we study about Gandhi's life in South Africa. I also want to show you a picture of South Africa in relation to the rest of the continent. So this is a map from 1884. So just a decade before Gandhi came, and you see this is South Africa. As you can see, this is Africa, and the entire continent is under European control. But it's all like, when you look at it, it is such a sad state. The whole continent is under European control, and then people have the nerve to say that, Africa is so backward, Africa is not developed, Africa has this problem and that problem. But as you can see, the Europeans were controlling this, and long after 1884. So what are we saying when we say a continent is underdeveloped? What actually happened to this continent? But that is part of another story. I just wanted you to have a reference here. So now, what happened to Gandhi when he arrived in this country? We all know that something happened to him. So that is called the train incident. So what is it that happened? Just to remind us, could people, maybe one of you could talk about it or write it down? Let's see. Farida, you are going to say something. Yes, Farida, please go ahead. Sorry, Farida's voice, even though I can hear it, Samir tells me that people can't, some of the people can't. So I'll just repeat. She says that he had a first class ticket, but he was thrown out of the train because he was an Indian. So he was not allowed to travel in the first class in the train. And Farida is right. This is what happened to this man. Now, there are a few more things that happened to him. One is the Stagecoach incident. So he had, again, purchased a ticket for the Stagecoach. He was supposed to sit inside. And when the conductor of the Stagecoach saw him, he said, "Oh, you're Indian. Why should you sit inside? You sit where I sit with the coachman, and I will take your seat and I will sit inside." And Gandhi was deeply offended, and he held on to the coach. He didn't let it go, and he wouldn't let himself be put on the side of the coachman. And he insisted that he should be inside the coach. And of course, he had the right to do that because he had a ticket to sit inside. But it's more than that. It had a lot to do with the fact that he thought he was better than the coachman. And the coachman actually, so not the coachman, the conductor. And the conductor actually started beating him up. And Gandhi, even though he was small and he was not a very strong person, he couldn't fight back or anything. He held on to the coach, and he was being beaten up. And that's when some of the other passengers came to his rescue and said that this is not right. Why are you doing that? Even though they were white, they did say things against the abuse that was being inflicted on him. So that's one incident. The second is that when he was in Durban, there was, in those days, a curfew. The Indians were not allowed to walk outside daylight. So there was a time by which you were supposed to be at home and you couldn't walk outside. But he, being a lawyer, and he had come there employed by a big firm, and he was not an indentured laborer, he had a special permission to walk. And so he was walking on the pavement, where in any case Indians were denied the right to walk on, but he did have a permit to do that, and he was walking and he was attacked. So all these things were happening to him because he was Indian, he was a non-white. And just like, it happens to most of us when we are hurt, our dignity is hurt, we feel like, we've been attacked unfairly, we do turn to religion, to philosophy, and so on. So he started to read things, and one of the books that he read at this time is called The Kingdom of God is Within You by Leo Tolstoy. And the book is about passive resistance, about non-violence, but it's not talking about it from a personal perspective. It talks about how governments should practice these things. So the reason I mentioned this particular book is, obviously Gandhi read a lot of books. So why is it that I'm referring to this one book? It's because Gandhi, in his own biography, has mentioned this book along with two others as the most important influences in his life. The other two books are John Ruskin's Unto This Last, which is actually a book on economics, and Gandhi translated Unto This Last into Gujarati in 1908. And what did he call it? It's a very famous book. I'm sure people who have read about Gandhi may have heard about it. That book is called Sarvodaya. And Sarvodaya means well-being for all. So this is the kind of economics that says, if we take a step in our economy, it should benefit everybody. It should raise the level of their living, their standard of their living. It should be for the whole society. Economics that is good for all. So Gandhi, that is the second book. The other book is the works of Raichand Bhai, whose formal name was Srimad Rajya Chandra, but he's often known as Raichand Bhai. He was a Jain poet, mystic, philosopher, scholar, social reformer, and Gandhi was very influenced by him. What is also interesting to note here is that all these three authors that I'm talking about are around the time of Gandhi. John Ruskin is before him, but still the same century. So he's studying these new works. I mean, it's all relative, but new works for that time. He's not just referring to the Vedas and the Mahabharata and all those things which are beautiful texts, but he's not just stuck with them. He's actually looking at how people have handled the question of life and violence and so on in his times. When these things happen to him, he's attacked, he's abused. He starts to think of these questions, and he wants to know if other people also have had the same experiences. And then he finds that this happens to people, and that is why, even though they can afford first class, they don't travel. So like his employer tells him, who's quite a rich man, he tells him, Dada Abdullah, that you should not travel first class, because this is what's going to happen to you. And after the Stagecoach incident, actually, he stays with another man who's also, by the way, a Muslim. When he's in trouble in all these places, he stays with Muslim people from his community, from Kathiawar. So again, religion doesn't come there. He's helped by these Muslim men. So this other Muslim man he stays with, who's a rich man, also tells him that, look, you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't do it. So he now calls a meeting of Indian traders who are rich people. And he discusses this discrimination, and he says, look, it happened to me, but you tell me that this happens to you as well. That's why you don't travel a class that you can actually afford to travel in. So let's do something about it. And he encourages them to join him in this plea that he drafts, and he gets the approval of the community around him. His community at that time are the rich merchant class Indians. And because he pleased to the government that, you see, this is wrong, we are paying and we are British, because he considers himself a British citizen. We deserve to be treated in the right way, and this is wrong. And as a result, an assurance is given to the trading community that Indians can travel first and second class as long as they are properly dressed. So Indians who were properly dressed could travel first and second class tickets. So this is very interesting, right? You know, the properly dressed, we still face that in our society. You know, if you're properly dressed, doors open for you. Now, what happens after this? His term ends there in South Africa. So he's finished his work with Dada Abdullah. He's going back. Now, as he's going back, so this is actually his farewell party. Now, when the farewell party is taking place, somebody comes to him and says, you know, because, you know, now he has this reputation that, okay, and he takes up these issues of dignity. I mean, he's not a political leader, but he's like, sort of like, people look up to him in this merchant class. So one of the people tells him that, look, there's a new law that is being proposed, and it will deny Indians of Natal, you know, the colony that is there, the right to vote in the parliamentary elections. And I just want to clarify one thing here, is that when we say right to vote, it was not for all Indians. It was the owners of land. So again, we are talking of a specific class of Indians, the people who could afford to own land in Natal, the colony. Only they were qualified to vote. And it was proposed that their right to vote will be taken away from them. So Gandhi decides that this is totally unfair, and he decides to extend his stay. And the joke is that he wanted to extend it by 1 month, but he ended up living in South Africa for another 21 years. Oh, sorry, another 20 years. So with the 1 year before that, it becomes 21 years. So that 1 month extension led to another 20 years in South Africa. Pretty amazing, eh? So now this vote taking away issue is coming up. Again, I'm reminding you that this only concerns a very small number of people, a few thousand people that are in Natal. It does not concern the indentured laborers. So what Gandhi does is he collects 10,000 signatures, which is a lot of signatures for the community that has money, because there were not that many people with money. So 10,000 signatures is a really big number. He collects this and he files a petition. He hands it over to the British government, and the petition fails. It is rejected. As a result, he realizes, now there I have a little picture there of the present way we do our pleas. You know, when we don't like something, the first thing we do is, of course, talk about it to people around us. We don't like this is happening. Then we try to get support. We go around, we collect signatures. And this is a sort of like the very first part of any society's or any person's way of protesting. It's one of the first forms of protest, that you get other people to sign on to what you think should be done. And many people do support you. This is a very simple way to protest, to register your protest. So he does that, he fails. So as a result, he starts the Natal Indian Congress to fight discrimination against the Indian trading class. Dada Abdullah was the honorary secretary, the person who brought Gandhi to South Africa. His photograph is down with Gandhi here that I've shown you before. And some of the other people who were involved were Dada Haji Habib, Musa Haji Adam, Murugesa Pillai, Ramaswamy Naidu, Hussain Miran, K.R. Naina, Amod Bayat, Parsi Rastamji, there was Qasim Amod Tili, Dorai Swami Pillai, Omar Haji Aba, Rangaswamy Padaichi. The reason I'm telling you these names is that, you know, in those days, also in the trading class, there were people of different religions. And the firm that called Gandhi was owned by Muslim traders, but there were also Hindu traders. There were Parsi traders, and so on. And also this class included lawyers and sort of other professionals, as we call them, and some of them were also Christians of Indian origin. Once again, we must remember that this is talking about a particular class. And another way we see how this was limited to the moneyed class is that the membership of this Congress was restricted because of the annual subscription, that the fee that was charged, and that was £3 minimum for a year. Now that is a huge amount of money for an indentured laborer. As I said, you know, they are getting 20 shillings a month. There's no way they can pay a £3 annual subscription fee. So it's really for people who have money, like Gandhi. And what happens now is that something much bigger happens, which is number 5 here, is the 1895 Indian Immigration Law Amendment. What does it do? It tells it's real cheating here now. Okay, what it's telling the indentured laborers is that, okay, you've finished your 5 years, but from now on, you will have to accept re-indenture for further 2 years. So you'll have to work pretty much for free for another 2 years. If you don't, you'll have to pay a £3 annual tax. Now, this is really difficult, because how can people, as I've already explained, who are earning so little, pay a £3 annual tax? And I'll tell you why the British government did it. Is because in 1885, there was a commission that had been formed, and it later on found out, the research that it did, found out that Indians dominated the food produce market. And those who did not, who were not part of the food market also became entrepreneurs, opened stores and hotels, and while others were making a living through gardening, hawking, and fishing. And, you know, in order to force Indians into employment, because they really did not, nobody who has any dignity or who wants, enough money in life to do more than, just like be dependent for food, would like to do other things. And so this was to force Indians to continue being slaves. And so this law came out. And at this time, Gandhi really does have to go to India, because he has really delayed it. His family commitments make him go back to India. But when he goes to India, he writes something called the Green Pamphlet, in which he exposes the conditions of the Indian indentured laborers in South Africa. And this Green Pamphlet is taken by the British as an anti-government publication. Now, I have a little image there which says advocacy. Under advocacy, when we do activist stuff these days, we are lobbying, we are campaigning, we are using the media, we are also forming coalitions. And Gandhi was doing it on his trip to India. He was lobbying the British government in India. He was campaigning, which means he was telling a lot of people, that this is wrong. He was asking people to join in his campaign. He was writing in the media, and he was trying to form coalitions with Indian activists about it. So that's why he wrote this Green Pamphlet. And when he came back to South Africa, many people don't know this, he was almost lynched when he arrived back in South Africa. In fact, the ship that he was on was not allowed to dock for 3 days. And the mob, a white mob, a mob of Europeans, attacked Gandhi, but he did not press any charges. Then what happens was that there was the Boer War. So just to explain, there were people called Boers in South Africa. Perhaps I should ask the participants if they know who the Boers are or were. Would anybody like to answer that? Let's see. Who were the Boers? Okay, so Boers just means farmers in Afrikaans. It is the people of Dutch descent. You know, before the British were there in South Africa, there were the Dutch people who were ruling parts of what is now South Africa, especially the Cape area. And the people who stayed here, you know, they were no longer like they were no longer rulers necessarily all the time, but they are referred to as the Boer people. And they, you know, in general terms, we also call them as Afrikaners. And there, you know, the British were fighting wars with these people. There were two places where they were doing this mostly, the Transvaal and the Orange Free State. So now Gandhi, because he thinks of himself as a loyal British subject, decides to form the Indian Ambulance Corps, Natal Indian Ambulance Corps. And it was created by Gandhi, and many people have called him the, you know, stretcher bearer of the British Empire. I take a little bit of a different view of Gandhi on this. I would definitely not have done what he did, perhaps, but the whole idea for Gandhi at that time was that if we are going to prove to the British that we are good, loyal subjects, perhaps they will treat us nicely. And that was his whole point. Also, we must remember that Gandhi had a huge interest in medicine. You know, he actually at one point wanted to be a doctor, and he had learned how to do first aid. He knew actually more than first aid, and he was really troubled by war. He did not like people getting injured and so on, and he did want to help. But of course, the larger issue here is that he wanted to be in the good books of the British. In fact, he was bestowed with the title Kaiser-e-Hind by the British for his work in the Boer War. This title was, and I must point this out now because many people forget, they know that he was given this title, but what they forget is that he also gave this back to the British, and he gave it up when the Jallianwala Bagh massacre happened in 1990. And in that, he's not alone. There are many other people who had been bestowed titles who gave it back. So we must remember that, you know, people change, people understand, and people then move to the next thing. So this, by the way, this ambulance corps did not work for too long. Most of it, 300, there were about 1,100 of them. 300 were the passenger Indians. The rest were the indentured laborers, and they all, after a point, disbanded. It really didn't succeed that much. You know, they didn't carry on for too long. Now, despite getting this title, he realizes the British are not going to help at all. The British are not helping at all. So he says, now what's my next step? What other alternative do I have? He's always trying new things. So he goes for a newspaper. He starts a newspaper, you see, and the newspaper was called The Indian Opinion. It was started in 1904. It was published in 4 languages: English, Gujarati, Hindi, and Tamil. Why Tamil? Because most of the people who came to South Africa as indentured laborers were from the Tamil-speaking parts of India. And this newspaper establishment is very important because now he is really getting quite fed up with just trying to talk to the British. He wants to tell the whole world what is wrong with the treatment of Indians in South Africa. And then we come to something called the Phoenix Settlement. It was also in Natal. And the newspaper actually becomes part of a larger project. He buys some land in Phoenix, which is outside of Durban. And he invites other people to live as a community. He says, you know, we should own things collectively. We should not own personal stuff, apart from, you know, your clothes and a few other things. Everybody has to do manual labor. There's environmental protection. There are a lot of trees planted. The trees are taken care of. The animals that are there are taken care of. Environmental protection is there. Interfaith harmony is there. And in this, I must tell you that there are also Christians and Jews and Hindus living, and Muslims. Muslims not so much, but there are Muslims who are supporting. There were not that many Muslims in Natal in those days. There were more in the Johannesburg area. But everyone's quite mixed there. And they also help the plague patients. There's a plague in those days in that area, and they help the plague patients there. As I told you, Gandhi was very much into first aid and giving medicines and so on. Now here I'd like to mention that one of his neighbors is John Langalibalele Dube, and this is a very important neighbor. Why? Because he was the founding president of the South African Native National Congress, which became the African National Congress in 1923. And they did talk some of the, if you look at Indian opinion, there's even a mention of Dube. There is a mention of why Indians may be forced to make a united front with blacks in South Africa if conditions continue the way they do. And there is a real chance for Gandhi and his comrades to join hands with blacks in South Africa. And they don't do that. It's a missed opportunity. It's also a missed opportunity from the other side. It's both ways. Nothing comes of it. And it's very sad that nothing comes of it. It's an opportunity lost, definitely. Then he is now fighting these cases on behalf of the Indian community. So he has to go to the Pretoria area a lot, the Johannesburg that, has these where his law practices. So now you can see there where it's quite a distance, from Durban to Johannesburg, especially in those days. And he's going there a lot. It is part of what is called, now it is a different state, but in those days it used to be called Transvaal. And one thing that I must tell you here, even if you look at Mandela, you look at many other activists around the world, many of them have been lawyers. So this whole thing about, this is a troublemaker, and this person is always going against whatever is the established norm. Actually, the activists, a lot of activists around the world have first tried to go through legal means. So a lot of the activists were lawyers. They actually tried to fight legal battles in the court to prove that there was injustice and it's not right and so on. It's only when that failed, and they even tried negotiation. It's only when that failed that they went into civil disobedience and so on. Now we will move on to the first satyagraha by Gandhi. It's a term that was coined by his nephew, actually, and it is a word that's used a lot. I would really love it if somebody tries to explain, in whatever understanding they have of satyagraha, what does it actually mean? Anybody? Anybody who, yeah, there is a person. Who's offering to say something? Manjula ji? Yeah. Okay, but would anybody like to tell us what satyagraha means? Manjula?
Ji, I would say satya meaning truth and graha meaning embrace, to adopt, and so the embracing truth.
Thank you, Manjula ji. That's a very good explanation. And I will also go back to some of the points that other people are asking here. I'll answer that. So Satya, as Manjula ji said, is the truth, and agraha, to make an agraha karna, it means to insist. So when you insist on truth, that is satyagraha. But what many people forget is the definition of satya according to Gandhi. It's truth, and truth according to him is life. So anything that is linked to life, love, justice, cooperation, these kind of things, they form satya. So satya is not some truth out there, that people say, okay, it's my connection with God. It may be, but it's much more than that. So when he's saying that I will insist on the truth, he's talking about the various things that make life possible, and the topmost among them is love. Now I'm going to tell you in his own words that he said truth implies love. Truth is life. Firmness or agraha is a synonym for force. And he says, I thus began to call the Indian movement satyagraha. That is to say, the force which is born of truth and love or non-violence. And he gave up the use of the phrase passive resistance. And that's very important, that passive resistance has a different connotation. Here he's talking of a force. He's saying, I insist on doing what is right. He's also at this time saying that law or no law, I don't care. If I believe that it is the truth, it is the just thing to do, I will do it. So it is about justice. And now I want to just quickly see in the early years in South Africa, what was the difference in the treatment between the migrant Indians and the locals? As I have said, the migrant Indians earn much less. The locals, you see, that's another, like a whole totally different story. Why were the migrants actually called to the various British colonies? Was also because they didn't understand the language. They didn't have any understanding of the geography. They were more, you could control them better. They would come in small numbers. They would just be your slaves. Whereas the locals, they definitely had more power because they had their own clans. They had their own tribes. Of course, once the apartheid regime starts to kick in, which is before the formal apartheid happens, the blacks are treated much worse than Indians. And in fact, even in those days, they were being treated much worse, but at least they had their own tribes, their own villages, their own ways of life, their own resources that they could fall back upon. Jagmohan Singh ji is saying 1890 to 1900 is the period in which British policies caused the worst famine. Exactly right. And, that's why Jagmohan Singh ji, I mentioned in the beginning that many people agreed to these terms because they just wanted food. I'm going to just show you a couple of pictures of the Indians in British India. Look at this. These are Indians from British India. It was really pathetic. I need to go back to my, yeah. So now, sorry, I need to close this so I can see. So now the Asiatic Registration Act that comes here, we're going to talk about that. And I want to tell you why this satyagraha happened. It happened because of this law. This was a direct result of this law. And what did this law say? It is basically a pass law. It is an identity card law, which says to you that if you don't have this thumb-printed identity card, you cannot move around in the province. If you want to come into the province, this is all for Indians and the Chinese. If you want to come inside, you will also need this pass. And basically what it is doing, and we can put it in context of today, is that people are being denied rights based on a piece of paper. So you are denied just common basic rights of movement, of employment. These people could not be employed if they didn't have the pass. This is entirely based on their being Indian and Chinese. If they are, they need the pass. The white people, they don't. And this happens in Transvaal. This is again one of the old pictures here, which is people of different religions of Indian origin here. Now, this is an iconic moment in the history of satyagraha. It's the first mass meeting that declares that we are going to break the law. And it happens at the Empire Theatre in Johannesburg in 1906. It has been reproduced in movies sometimes, although I would say that a lot of the movies we have watched about Gandhi are not truthful. There's a lot of just fiction there. But this is a historic event. And I want to read to you what they said there. Just think about it. These are people who were, until now, they were trying everything, pleading, they were writing pleas with signatures. This is what was said. Should the governments reject the humble prayer of the Indian community against the Asiatic Ordinance, every Indian present at this meeting solemnly and sincerely resolves that rather than submit to this tyrannical law and abide by its un-British provisions, he will prefer to go to jail and will continue to do so until it pleases His Majesty the King Emperor to grant relief. This is quite a thing to say for a small minority group in a country that is not the country of their origin in most cases. Another interesting thing to note is that over 3,000 people came to this meeting. The auditorium was owned by a Jewish man. This whole thing, the meeting that happened, was multilingual. It was addressed by a person called Abdul Ghani. Dr. Godfrey is a Christian of Indian origin. And also in Tamil, Mr. Naidu spoke. GKT Naidu is a very big name in the Indian community in South Africa. And declaration of civil disobedience that we've discussed is made. And very beautifully, a coalition with the Chinese community is established. Look at this now. This is a photograph that is amazing. Look at this. These are 4,200 Chinese workers in South Africa. If you look there, sorry, you can't see my cursor, but if you look at the right on the top of the picture, it says the roll call 4,200 coolies. So the Chinese, they were also referred to as coolies. This picture was taken in Witwatersrand between 1904 and 1910. Look at this picture. It really is an amazing picture. What is happening now is that solidarity and common purpose is being established by Gandhi and his friends. So the Chinese, they are obviously not Indian. They are Chinese, but Gandhi goes to meetings in Chinese residential areas. The Chinese representatives come to Indian meetings. It's a beautiful display of solidarity in those days. And this is because they are both targeted. These communities are both targeted. It is no longer just an Indian struggle. It is an Indian and Chinese struggle. Now, just as they're doing this, again, Gandhi decides to be in the good books of the British. He does this a few times. I think he still has hope that, by doing good stuff to the British, they will just accept all the demands. So you see, the Zulu people of South Africa, they revolted in 1906. Why? They had a very genuine reason to revolt. They were taxed. There was a tax that was imposed on them, just like the Indians had a tax imposed them, and Gandhi had protested against it. These people protested, but nothing was done, so they revolted. They revolted against the people, against the government in Natal. And Gandhi said, oh, I'm going to help. I'm going to again form an ambulance corps and I'll help them. Now, what is interesting here is that he's actually quite happy when he realizes that his ambulance corps is going to be tended to the wounded Zulu people, enemy and friendlies. And he also writes, it's in his own words, he says, I have no quarrel with the Zulu people. They have done nothing bad to the Indian people. I have no quarrels with them. But again, you know, and he's very happy that he's actually helping them when they're wounded. But again, he doesn't realize that maybe it is better to form a coalition with them and fight the British. And we can be critical. We should be critical. Also, it didn't happen from the other side too. The leaders in the Black communities also, they did not try to form a coalition with Gandhi and his friends. So then this happens, and then this is very important, is the first imprisonment of Gandhi. It is in 1908. You know, he is arrested with Lengchin and Thambi Naidu. Thambi Naidu is the same guy I have mentioned earlier. And this is for not registering under the Asiatic Registration Act. So this is beautiful. There is a Tamil speaking person. There is a Gujarati speaking person. And Thambi Naidu, by the way, came from another, you know, family of people who were basically, you know, they were not like some huge family name, like a big business or something. They did have business in this part of South Africa, but they are not some like, you know, great like business family or something. These are people who have worked hard and, you know, made a bit of money, but they are still part of the community. And there is Lengchin, whose photograph I've not been able to find. But all these people, including Gandhi, show that if you want to do something, you have to lead by example, and that personal sacrifice will happen. If you really believe in something and you lead by example, it will happen. I've given you some examples. That's Thambi Naidu's picture on the right on the top. There's, of course, Rosa Parks. There is Martin Luther King Jr. That is a delegation of the Chinese community who were part of the civil disobedience. And then Gandhi is arrested, and then General Smuts, who's the general at that time in the Transvaal, he has an agreement with Gandhi, and he says that, okay, we will, if you register voluntarily, we will take back the law. And Gandhi believes him, and he goes and registers voluntarily with Mr. Thambi Naidu. And he's attacked by his own people, his own comrades, because they see him as somebody who's betraying the cause. And what happens then is the government betrays Gandhi. It goes back on its word. So now what happens because of this is the whole organization breaks down. You know, there's breaking of ranks, which is what the colonial powers used to do a lot. You know, they would make you believe in something, then they'll go back on you on their word, and you know that broke the ranks. Gandhi loses reputation, so he renews civil disobedience. Now, what does it mean? It means that the traders will say, I'm going to trade. I'm not going to carry that piece of paper for identity no matter what. I'm going to trade without it. Indians are going to enter Transvaal, and the Chinese also did this, that we are going to enter Transvaal without this piece of paper. They were going to do mass meetings. Because of that, deportation started, and people were arrested also. So deportations means people were sent back to India. There were arrests made, and in this, Hira Lal, one of Gandhi's sons, was also arrested. Kasturba or Kasturbai, which was her original name, and 4 other people wrote in the press saying how bad this is. You know, their husbands are being arrested. And the first Indian Women's Association is founded by Mrs. Veeramal Naidu, Mrs. Patel, whose first name I could not find, and Sonia Schlesin, who was actually the secretary of Gandhi. She was a Jewish woman. And then, you know, what happens is they decide that they're going to burn the certificates that are their identity certificates that they had got in the first place, you know, when they got cheated, when they had registered. So they went and they did it. And what is quite amazing is that it's also a symbolic thing. because they come outside of a mosque, which is the Hamidiya Mosque in Johannesburg, as an act of defiance against registration and immigration laws, and they burn this. And this is actually a sculpture made by a South African Indian artist. There's a cauldron there, and when you go near it, you see a pass burning. These are pass laws, basically. You know, later on, the notorious pass laws are part of this. So this is the Hamidiya Mosque. These are some of the women that you see who participated in civil disobedience. Unfortunately, I don't have pictures, because in those days, just, you know, women didn't get photographed as much. The white women did get photographed more than Indian women. On the bottom right is a picture of women who were imprisoned in civil disobedience. The lady here, Waliamma Mudaliar, she actually died because of the imprisonment. And you know, these are all women who participated. Many more participated. We just don't have the pictures. And then Gandhi goes to England with Haji Habib, his friend, who's a merchant from Johannesburg area, and he sends Henry Pollock, who is actually a Jewish man from England. He sends him to India to advocate on behalf of South African Indians. And what Gandhi is trying to do now is asking the Indians in India to help the South African Indians, because he's saying that, look, you know, they are also part of your community. I'm sorry, I won't be able to read this whole thing, but if anybody wants later on, they can read it. But again, there are mixed names here: Hindu, Muslim, Christian, so on. And then, because what has happened, you know, because of the whole thing that happened, the civil disobedience and all, he starts the Tolstoy Farm. Why? Because people have lost their jobs. They have nowhere to stay, many of them. You know, there's not enough food. So it is really a financial, from a practical point of view, that's the solution. He gets this beautiful piece of land that is donated by Herman Kallenbach, who was his friend in South Africa, continued his friendship for a very long time. He donated this land. He was a Jewish man, white man. He gave this land to Gandhi. And so this was for all those who had lost their jobs and homes, even though not more than 60, 70 people at a time stayed there. But, you know, people would stay, and then once they found jobs or other ways to support themselves, they would move on. And Kallenbach even created a school there, and an extra building to as a workshop, you know, and living quarters for extra people and so on. So it was really born out of practical necessity, but it also, again, I think, tried to build a community where people would do manual labor. You know, they would live as a large, big family. The children would grow up together. They would farm together and so on. So this was more than just a place to stay. And Gandhi believed that it was the Tolstoy Farm that prepared people for the later struggle, which was the really big struggle, which I'm going to talk about right now. Sorry, I have to rush through this now. But in 1913, the Supreme Court in South Africa, it decided that all non-Christian marriages will be illegal. So what does that mean is that all the Hindu women and the Muslim women in the Indian community, they are basically told that, look, you know, your marriages are not legal, all your children are illegal, and there will be no inheritance, and, you know, so on. So obviously this is a huge threat to the Indian family unit. And so women, they join protests in large number. This becomes really big. So now two big issues come together: the marriage law and the £3 tax that we have talked about earlier, which if you would no longer want to be an indentured laborer, you will have to pay the £3 tax that we've already talked about. Now something amazing happens, and guys, this is something that we must remember when we are talking about Gandhi in India, is this huge thing that starts in South Africa now. So the marriages were attacked, movement was attacked, you know, a lot of laws came that attacked people, and women joined in, you know, families joined in, everyone's joining into protest. But now they turn it into a mass movement. So it is an unprecedented civil disobedience that has ever been seen in that known history at that time, because it's a matter of dignity, it's a matter of survival for most Indians. So what happens is, from Durban railway station, 16 women and men, including Kasturba Gandhi, they start from, so let's go to this map quickly. Yeah, this map here. They go from down there, you know, in Durban. Okay, but Durban, you see on the right side, on the right of Lesotho, on the east of Lesotho. From there, they travel all the way to Johannesburg. So they break the pass laws. They are breaking the pass laws because they're not allowed to enter. And firstly, the government doesn't arrest them because they know that, you know, okay, if we arrest them, this is going to become quite big. But then the women refuse to move and they are arrested. Another group of women starts from what is now Johannesburg and goes to Durban and then comes back to Johannesburg to break the law because they want to support their sisters. All these women are jailed for 3 months. It's a huge, you know, time. And all the men take care of the children who are left behind. They take care of the food, they clean the house. The other community members come and start taking care of the children and of the household. So this is the beginning of something very big when we talk about activism. You know, why do women don't get involved sometimes? It's because, you know, they also have the double responsibility of taking care of homes. But here they actually devise a system that men are making meals, men are cleaning, other households are joining in the raising of the kids, you know, and taking care of the kids. So that is what happens. Then what happens is the railway workers join the strike. The miners join the strike. With the railway workers and miners, largely because of the help of Mr. Thambi Naidu, who speaks Tamil. Gandhi doesn't speak Tamil. So there are, you know, a lot of comrades Gandhi has who help in this. And then the finale. It is beautiful. It is called the Great March of 1913. Look at this. Gandhi starts to walk with about 2,000 plus people, with children, with women. And as he starts to walk, look at the pictures, not the best quality, but there are people joining. Do you see from the sides? People are joining from the sides. And Gandhi is arrested. You know, every big leader is arrested on this march. They are joining from various parts of the country. So it's not just one part. All the major leaders get arrested, but guess what? The march continues. The march continues without the leaders. And that is real civil disobedience for you. It's called the Great March of 1930. What happens in 1914? The 3 pound tax that was imposed is abolished because of the result of this huge civil disobedience. All the Indian customary marriages are considered valid. Unfortunately, the past laws are coming and going. They continue well into the apartheid era. Now, you know, this is the legacy of Gandhi. And Gandhi at this time ends the satyagraha because he had a deal with the British. He had, you know, he had a specific demand. He had a few specific demands. They were met. So he ends the satyagraha in 1917. Actually, the indentured labor system from India is abolished. So now Gandhi is going back. And the question really for us is, did satyagraha end? These are pictures of defiance against apartheid, which comes later. So apartheid in theory, not in theory, actually in practice has already started. But like as a formal thing, it only comes later on, you know, a few decades after Gandhi leaves. But these are Indians in South Africa. They are not the people who went back to India. They are Indians who stayed. These are pictures of Indians participating against apartheid, you know, in the protests against apartheid, in civil disobedience against apartheid. And this is satyagraha in India. That happened later when Gandhi was the leader. So the real question is, did satyagraha really end? And to wrap up my presentation, I'd like to end with who was Gandhi when he left South Africa. He's obviously 21 years older, but everyone ages differently. I've been told by numerous people, Abhi tum young ho, you're so young, you know, so you believe in these things, and you know, when you get older, you will stop believing in these things. With this guy, things happened the other way. I mean, it's not to say that he didn't, you know, think about things when he was young, but he actually became a more sort of, he started believing in justice even more. So, you know, there are people who become more interested in these things as they get older. He no longer identifies as the person in 1893, which means that he's not concerned that he's going to not travel first class. You know, those are not his worries anymore. He has a sense of justice, which has gone from his individual, you know, whatever happened to him, to the community. The definition of community has expanded for him. He was first an individual. He was thinking about the merchants, then it became the indentured laborers, then it became Indians, and he has a very high concern for Indians. He really thinks of India as his community, Indians as his community, which is why, you know, he's more concerned about Indians than other people, perhaps, which happens to many leaders. It happened to Mandela also. You know, he was concerned, he had an aim, he wanted freedom for his people, and that was it. Similarly, Gandhi had an aim, he wanted freedom for Indians, and that was it, and he wasn't really helping other movements around the world. He has lived the diversity of religion, caste, and race to some extent. He has personally sacrificed for things. He's a representative of Indians internationally. He has friends across continents now who will be speaking on his behalf. He has left behind something that plays a pivotal role in the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, and he's getting ready to fight a bigger battle. You know, he's 21 years older now, but he has another few decades to go in India, where he fights the British colonial rule in India. So friends, thank you. Thank you for being so patient and listening to this. I have more stuff, but we have limited time. So, you know, I just want to end quickly with this one note that for me, Gandhi is somebody I want to study. I have studied a lot over the years because I'm a peace educator. It does not mean that he's a god for me. I am critical of many things he did, but I will say this, that if you want to change anything in this world, and you want it to happen on a scale where other people also get involved, it's not just your personal battle, then Gandhi is somebody you must study and maybe learn from his mistakes and learn from where he succeeded. So thank you, everyone, and we now open for any questions or comments that there may be. Yeah, sure. Samir will moderate. Thank you very much. Please come.
Thank you, Shirin. I think we all enjoyed that. There's been lots of comments coming through. Shine has written such a long comment that I don't think I can rephrase it. Shine, can I just give you the microphone and you can ask your question or make a comment?
Hi. Basically, this was like such an enlightening session. And while we were going through the session, I could kind of, find a few contrasts. Like in India, people still live with this understanding that we are free from the British, we are free from the colonial mindset, and we are being ruled by our own people. But we somehow are unable to see that, there are still atrocities in the system. And I would also mention that the character building of individuals kind of taken up. That's one of the observations that I kind of noticed. And I also noticed, like, while during the presentation, the people who were suffering were the ones who were revolting against the system. And now I think this is a good thing that people who are not suffering are also coming out and speaking against the system in India. So there are upper class Hindus, there are people who are Hindus, but they are talking against communalism, they are talking against the system that is kind of breeding hatred. Third observation that I made is that many activists organizations want their own name to be the forefront. They don't look at the bigger picture, and it's important to look at the bigger picture. So the bigger picture is that we don't want a system that is kind of driven for hatred, which is communal, which is not looking at the larger group good of the society. And I also feel that there's some kind of that when the information is being disseminated in one is more effective and as compared to what Facebook and Google do. So basically, they just they kind of control the information. They go by government directives. They kind of also censor, like Google censored information in China. They agreed to do that. So it's like just like these few observations, kind of, while listening to the webinar, I made these observations.
Great, thanks so much. Does anyone else have a question or a comment? You can raise your hand or you can type comments into the chat, whatever you prefer.
We already have a few comments, but they're, praising us and that sort of thing. But if there are any questions, I mean, we are very happy to get the praise, but if there are any questions, we would
There's
also...
one thing I just wanted to add to what Shirin said about the treatment of natives. Maybe I'll do that unless there's another question.
Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so when you read the colonial literature, you find that there's a preoccupation with finding labor. And the Indians were already, as Shirin explained very well, there was a system of already obtaining indentured labor from India, which was in place for many decades. It was in place from the 1830s, I believe. Yeah. So the problem here was that they couldn't, because they were still at war with the Zulus and with other people in different parts of Southern Africa, they couldn't actually turn them into slaves. They couldn't turn them into workers. And so it's not until Cecil John Rhodes and the Land Act of 1913 that you have the displacement of blacks from their traditional lands. And only then do you have, sort of a coerced black workforce in South Africa.
Also, I'd like to add here that many people who are not from South Africa don't quite understand the whole history of colonial intervention here. Is that, you have the Dutch, of course, that's why you have that whole heritage that is present here. Then there's the British, and then there is something called the apartheid government, okay, which is independent. They consider themselves as South Africans. But within South Africa, they differentiate between the blacks or all non-whites and whites. And that happens later as a formal policy. And so Indians, and blacks, they all are people who are being abused by the system. And the blacks are being abused more than the Indians, but they are all together in this. And that's why they fight against this apartheid government. And that is a subject of another webinar. But what I want you to know is that, when Gandhi leaves, and then Indians actually they stop coming to South Africa because of this settlement that they have from 1917. Then there are no indentured laborers coming. And things start to change, and the apartheid policy, when it comes, it's a different struggle, but it is taking lessons from what Gandhi and his friends. I always insist, it's not just Gandhi alone. His friends, his comrades, what they did here did help the anti-apartheid movement.
Fantastic. There's a couple more comments. There's a question. Shilpa is asking, what made Gandhi influential to the masses? Shine is asking again about connecting the dots. Protests against CAA have died down. Government is using COVID-19 to harass activists. So she's asking how we can apply some of this in today's situation. Jagmohan Singhji is saying the rulers know it very well. That's why fear psyche applies UAPEA on mass.
That's true. The question about what made Gandhi so appealing to people, what was it that influenced people, the masses? If you look at Gandhi's life, whether here or in India, it's a lot about what he does personally. He's not some guru who sits on the top and says, go and fight, or go and do this. He actually does it himself. So, that element of personal sacrifice is something that really appeals. The other thing that he's very good at is forming partnerships and coalitions. He knows, okay, I can't speak Tamil. I better find a person who has the same understanding of justice and injustice like me, who's willing to go out in the community and canvas and organize. So he finds Thambi Naidu, he's very good at that. Yes, in some ways he was quite autocratic, but in a lot of ways he was also somebody who was able to find the right people and say, okay, you go ahead and do this, and you go ahead and do that. And so he has friends who are white, he has friends who are Jewish, he has friends who are Christians, Mr. Freer, the priest. He's somebody who's British, who did more for the Indian struggle than many of the Indians did. So I think he's very good at these two things. And the third thing I think is very important is that he reads a lot. He studies a lot. He studies other people. He studies what they've written and what other people have done around the world. He's a good student.
He's a good student.
Yes.
Sure. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Shilpi saying she agrees with the comment.
Thank you, Shilpi.
We are a little bit past time, but if people can stay, I think we can have one or two more questions.
Sure. There is a thing about connecting the dots,
yes.
And Samir, perhaps you can talk about that.
No, I mean, I think that I think there are lessons to be learned in what Gandhi did in South Africa, and I think some of the same things that you're mentioning can be applied. I feel like we, on the left, we often are not making alliances, are not moving outside our comfort zone. And are not trying to think about how to practically engage power as well. Right? That's part of the story too. Gandhi is never saying, "Let me get 10 of my followers and give a lecture." I mean, that's not his style.
No, in fact, he was a very bad speaker.
Yeah. He doesn't not just, and he writes a lot, but he's not writing just for the sake of writing.
Yeah.
He's writing to gain popularity for a specific demand. He always has a demand.
True.
And he feels that I guess one thing that Gandhi did that I would find difficult in dealing with the Modi regime right now, that Gandhi had a lot of respect for the British Empire. Gandhi didn't agree with it, but trusted that the British Empire...
Initially.
I think even right until the end, he believed that they would do the right thing.
I think some of it also has to do with just the way he was, I mean, he gave that what is it called? The doubt, what is it called? The English phrase?
The
benefit of the doubt to people, I think, not just the British. But I would say that he did lose respect for the British, by the time 1940s comes and all.
Yeah.
It took him a while, but he did. By 1930s, 1940s, he was doing that.
Yeah, no, true. But even quite late in this story, that we just heard, he breaks ranks with some of his own comrades to go and negotiate a deal. Right? That was what, 1908?
Yeah.
So, I guess the point is that one has to, even with the Modi regime, one has to admit that this is a government that has huge popularity in India, and it cannot just be dismissed. If we want to make demands of it, we need to make demands in a way that they will be at least listened to.
Yeah.
So,
and I think what you said earlier about people, I think Shirin had mentioned that it's very important that people who have less to use stand in the front. It's very important. It's very easy to say to the poor person, go and fight. But where are we? Are we willing to take that risk? And in this, I would like to mention there's an interview we did with Mehnaz Mahmood, who is the mother of Sabeen Mahmood, who was killed in Pakistan. She was a human rights activist. She was killed in Pakistan for the work she was doing. And when we interviewed her mom for Peace Vigil, she said, you don't have to be poor or persecuted to stand with justice. So, I think that is something that we must learn, because Gandhi, despite the personal attacks he faced, he could have just gone back to India. He stayed and he fought, and I'm not saying all of us can be like Gandhi. I certainly don't have that courage, but at least we can learn and try and be better human beings.
Great. Jagmohan Singh ji is saying that he's learning from Tolstoy to be a good Christian. That's an interesting perspective. I think that there is something to that. I think that, I think one of the reasons that perhaps he he had that ability to negotiate with the British was because he did have such respect for Christianity.
Yeah, he believed in Christian anarchism, which is that they didn't believe in state as controlling things. They believed that the state should, if there is a state, if there's a government, it should be doing justice and all that, but that people as a whole should be following Jesus. The real teachings are with Jesus, according to this anarchism. There is the life of Jesus we should be following, which is the life of doing good for the poor, being just, being kind, and so on. So yes, and he did study Christianity. I mean, Gandhi studied all religions.
True. And there's a quote, not during the South Africa period, but later than that, when he's asked by some American journalist who probably didn't know much about Gandhi, he's asked, what do you think of Christianity? And he says, I like Christ a lot. I'm a big fan of Christ, but I'm not such a big fan of Christians. So showing the discrepancies there. I think that does it for us, guys. Thanks. This has been recorded, or unfortunately I started the recording a bit late, but most of it has been recorded and will be on YouTube within a couple of days. Our previous webinars are all on YouTube. I'd like to thank everyone, especially our presenter Shirin, for doing such a detailed and well-researched presentation.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank everyone and say we'll announce. So we had originally planned these 4 webinars when we thought everyone would be in COVID lockdown for about a month. And it seems that since everyone is going to be there a little bit longer, maybe we'll have to plan some more webinars. But we will be sending you all notifications by email.
And friends, also we'd like to tell you that we are in a position here because we are in South Africa, and we talk and we work with the local communities every day. We are in connection with the local people here. There's a lot we are learning. As people of Indian diaspora, we are learning a lot about the Indian community here, or I should say Indian communities here. So, as we learn more, we would like to share that knowledge with you. So, please join us in this journey. Gandhi is part of it, but there's a larger issue here. These are people who are not going like we have in the US or Canada. People go to study and so on. They go because they want to. But communities were brought here, Indian people were brought here, not because they wanted to. So, there's a big difference. One has to realize that. And in order to study that, we need to dig more into history. And it will help us also to understand that the worlds we live in, the bubbles we live in, are very dangerous when something like COVID happens. Because suddenly now we are exposed to this bigger world, which will also influence the way we are living. We can actually die if we don't change the circumstances of the world around us. So we may have like a very, like good family, we may have a good religious community, but all that is of very little use when something big like COVID happens, where we need to be connected to a larger world as well.
Fantastic. So with that, we'll say good night, good morning, very good night in India. Thanks to everyone who joined, and we will put this on YouTube as soon as we can.
Also, if you have suggestions for topics that we should work on, please do. We have access to great specialists. We are already in conversation with Mr. Jagmohan Singh ji, who is going to talk about Bhagat Singh, the martyr of India. And so, we are already in conversations with people, but if you have a suggestion, please do send.
Okay. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye from South Africa.